A few years ago, I can't really remember how many years ago, because when you're my age, life slips by quite quickly. Maybe 5 years ago, maybe 10 or 20, or perhaps 100 or so, I can't really remember now. I got involved in working for tourism for a country. And since then, I've become very interested in the whole issue of the nation and the brand. And what I wanted to talk about today a bit was this issue of the nation and the brand, and the nation as a brand. And I know that you in South Africa, for a whole variety of reasons, have been rather concerned with the way South Africa is perceived in the world, in Africa and in the world in general. And I thought a few observations around countries other than South Africa, and maybe South Africa itself might be entertaining. When you think of a country, any country, you think of it, we just heard Alistair talking about the various Guais, Paraguay and Paraguay and Uruguay and any other, Argentina, Guay and so on and so forth. When you think of these countries, when you think of any country, you think of it in a very odd and very disconnected kind of form. So if, for instance, if we start thinking of France, we might think, let's say, of luxury products, or we might think of food, we might think of restaurants, or we might think, let's say, of holidays, or we might think of very considerable engineering achievement, or we might think of art, Degas, Renoir, ballet, whatever it might be. We might think of a few odd politicians that happen to be French, like de Gaulle or Chirac, or maybe now Sarkozy and Royal, who are competing, or so maybe we don't think about Chirac at all. Or maybe we think about a few riots and things we read about in the newspaper or saw on the screen a year or so ago. In other words, we kind of have an idea about France in a sort of vague sort of way. Just as it might be people living in the United States or Australia or Great Britain or France, for that matter itself, might have an idea about South Africa in a vague kind of way. And those of you who've traveled abroad, and I guess most of you have, must have found rather irritating the confusion that people have in their minds between South Africa and Africa and Johannesburg and Cape Town and Nairobi. It's all over there somewhere. So we have these ideas in our head. Let's say we have an idea in our head, for the sake of the argument, about Italy, which is to do with luxury and glamour and Lamborghini and Ferrari and Gucci and so on and so forth, or maybe a bit of Berlusconi's added in. So an Italian airline, wants to advertise in, let's say, Great Britain. And the Italian airline happens to be Alitalia, which is arguably the world's worst airline. Now, actually, when I come to think about it, it isn't arguably at all, nothing to argue about. It is the world's worst airline. So what can you say about Alitalia if you happen to be a British advertising agent trying to persuade people to go fly Alitalia? Only something about how incredibly attractive Italians are. So with a bit of luck, you might get checked up with that chap in the lavatory. It's a funny old way to think about a country when you think about it. Or there are other situations, there are other places we know of where we don't know the country at all. All we know about is the brand that comes from the country. So we have, let's say, Samsung. Now, how many, I'm not going to embarrass you, but I guess there aren't very many people in this room who know anything about Korea apart from Samsung and Hyundai and Kia, one or two other names. You may know that the capital city of South Korea is Seoul. Let's think. Does anybody know? Hands up. Anybody know any other city in South Korea apart from... No, don't put your hands up because you don't know. So it isn't necessarily the case, though, that we always associate the nation and the brand. So many people in so many countries, the countries I work with, for example, say, well, we can't make ourselves known in the world because we haven't got any worldwide brands. We haven't got any well-known brands. Fine, that may be true. But it's also true that there are plenty of worldwide brands where people don't know much about the nation they come from. Samsung is an example of this. On the other hand, you do get situations, and this is one of them, where certain types of product are so very, very closely associated with the nation that you cannot separate them at all. So Scotch whisky is Scotch, and if, for the sake of the argument, it happened to be Italian whisky, just let's say, it wouldn't taste so nice. So there are these issues, or putting it another way, there's olive oil which comes from Italy or Greece or Spain or somewhere, and if it was Scottish olive oil, well, I don't know, it sort of doesn't seem right somehow. So there are these issues, and they're quite complex. So the certain types of product, wine, for example, is so closely associated with the nation, with a country, with a particular country, that it even has, in some cases, particular associations with the region. So great Europhiles and Eurocrats in my part of the world don't think necessarily that Euro wine would go down a bomb. It would be not necessarily the most successful kind of product you could have.